All right, so we're gonna get rolling, kick this off. Today will be substantially quicker than the first meeting that we had last week, just because last week, really wanted to cover a lot with the overall structure of the projects, the course, and all that. But this week is probably the second wonkiest of the course, just because we do have a little bit of overlap between Module 1 and Module 2. So just want to clarify that just so you know what's going on. And I, shared a little post in the announcement section today. But for module 2, the 4 key assignments that are due this week: key terms, event exploration discussion, the text article assignment, and the individual project. If it was me prioritizing my time, I would be reviewing, thinking about the individual project first and the most, just because it's going to be the most robust assignment of the three. The key terms, pretty straightforward. That's a nice one to dive into to get some of that verbiage and terminology in play and applying it to the sport management space prior to hopping into the text and article questions. Then the text and article questions, if you haven't checked them out, pretty straightforward. um One big thing that I look for, and this is where the text and article and event exploration assignments and your individual project come into play, is I want to make sure that you are, uh, putting the credit out there when you are finding information from a website, from a book, from video, from different materials. So when you are digging up information to validate your stance in the text and article discussions or questions, and when you're finding information for the event exploration, it is so critical to provide in-text citations, to cite those at the bottom of the document, just to show where you found this information. So, an example, if you were to select a venue such as Little Caesars Arena and everything that you share is common knowledge, I want more. So, I want to make sure you are forcing yourself to look and be like, let's find something new that we didn't know about this place. What businesses are year-long tenants there? What different youth organizations utilize the practice rink throughout the year that is under the cement atrium outside? So what are some of those dynamics that you might not know? So for those event explorations, yeah, it'll be easy to go down the path of obvious things, such as the Wings play there and the Pistons play there, and the Pistons are tenants of the greater Illich properties, blah blah blah. But let's just make sure we do have a mix of the presentation of common knowledge, but also things that we don't know that we have to dig for. So all those are going to be due by Wednesday at 11:55. Let's say for whatever reason, things happen and you get them in late. There is always, I believe, a 2-day leniency to get assignments in, and then they lock down permanently. So there will be a reduction of points. So you won't receive full score even if you submit a perfect assignment. But the hard deadline is always 2 days after the initial deadline. I would highly recommend you get it in by the deadline this week, just because you have another assignment due on Sunday. But that's the key thing. Also, on Wednesday, I would encourage that you check out the introduction chat forum, see and get to know some of the other students in the class. And that way you'll be able to select someone that might have a similar background to you, might have common interests, or right up top of JetNet, utilize the participant um, sub area to identify fellow classmates. And that way you could be able um, to see who's in the class, what they're doing, what they're interested in. So you have the power to select a partner, compared to me assigning it. So there's absolutely nothing wrong if you don't let me know who your partner is by Wednesday night. I'll just plot someone with you. So there's no biggie, no worries there. But if you do have a friend, buddy, whoever you want to work with, just send that and I'll make sure that you're in the same team so you can naturally work together. From there, the following week, we we just had, or not the following week, but this Sunday, the only assignment that is due is the next section of the individual project. So, compared to reiterating what I've already shared on the video, check out the video overview that'll walk through the depth that we're looking for, the key things, the SWOT analysis that we covered in last week's presentation. That'll take a big point within, but also this is where you're going to start to lay out the overall identity and construction of the event, identifying those key partners, the key vendors, maybe like a fiduciary who you have to operate it through, all that kind of stuff. It could be 5 pages in length, could be 3 pages, could be 2 pages, and maybe having a complemental SWOT analysis on more of a resource page. But then at the end of the day, for your final project, when you submit the report in May, this is a section you likely will be adding on to. So even though everything could look good right now, there's nothing wrong with adding more later, especially as you piece this whole thing together. Then next week, there will be every other assignment is due that Saturday. So the event, or that Sunday, the event exploration, the text assignments, all that. So project due this Sunday, everything else due the following Sunday, as we're introducing module 2 in 2 parts. So this week we're covering chapters 3 and 4. Next week we are covering chapters 5 and 6, and that'll wrap up the module. So feel free to use the chat to ask questions throughout, or if you synced your microphone, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Otherwise, we'll go through the presentation. We'll have time for questions at the end, and hopefully you can get on with your day in about 20 to 30 minutes. So with module 2, the overall theme with all this is finding the different elements to identify the guidelines, the key procedures, all the way from budgeting to marketing with special events. So, in chapter 3, the key things we're going to look at involve the definition and understanding of what sport commissions are. That's something that doesn't visibly exist to many in the Jackson, Lenawee, Hillsdale area, but they are of common occurrence in larger cities such as Lansing, Grand Rapids, and so on. Let's talk about that. The bidding process for events. So that goes hand in hand with what you're wrapping up in your individual project this week. And we will then spend time on budgeting. So to talk about the bidding process, this is what you're doing in the first project, and you're creating a presentation, a definition of the event to educate the audience, the potential stakeholders, of why they should be bringing this to town. So this is something that could be pitched to or by cities, visitors bureaus, colleges, sports commissions, to a greater power. So if you think about the Gus Macker example, the idea of Gus Macker was pitched to the Visitors Bureau and then approved by the city of Jackson to bring this to town. So it's not just Gus Macker, it goes through those layers of pitch to fiduciary to host city. If you think larger scale, the United States of America Olympic Committee could be working with a metropolitan area such as the greater LA area to bring the Summer Olympics to town, so it's not always just one, it's actually never one player. There's always different parties involved, stacked up for the bid and to get this to town. And then for those of you on the call, this is going to be a very good thing to document, especially with your project. But there are 4 key reasons that organizations use when putting this bid together, then more importantly, when approving the bid. So think about this from the angle of a city, of a municipality, of a visitors bureau, and those are to enhance the local economy. So to get people in the hotels, to get people in the restaurants, a organization could be working to do something to benefit the community on the greater scale. It could be something to like a driver to improve the host community's infrastructure. So, District Detroit is a party within the Illich Holdings collection of companies that did a lot of investments all the way from real estate to dining to retail to the establishment and creation of the Little Caesars Arena, to not just create a hockey arena, to create this new I don't not really but community in the downtown. So this brought more parking ramps, more restaurants beyond what they just did as an entity. So when you think about, some very, 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 very large scale events, the improving the overall infrastructure could be a major driver for a city when it comes to hosting events and upgrading facilities, enhancing the community of image or increase quality of life for residents. So a big issue that Jackson has is during the work week, hotels are traditionally at 95 to 100% capacity. So for those that are actually from Jackson, that is probably a mind-blowing statistic, because it's like, what are you doing in the town, right? On the weekend, so it's closer to 10 to 15%. So with this, people just don't know what to do in town. So that's why you see some events such as um, events at the Michigan International Speedway, or events happening downtown, events happening at nonprofits. It's to get people here and in partnerships to educate them on what there's to do in town with, cool one of a kind events, but also stuff on the greater scale where you're working together. And also to promote the community or organization. That one's pretty straightforward. So, when it comes to the economic impact, there are different ways that organizations factor what the true value is of an event, and why a city, why a sports commission, why whoever could buy in. So when you think about the spending, your calculation different levels of visitors with how much spending is happening specific to the event, but also goes a little bit further beyond that to what's going to be the impact on hotels? What's the impact in larger cities that actually pay for parking on parking revenues, on entertainment surrounding that, restaurants, like everything, how do you calculate that? And that's a very hard thing to figure out when you're figuring out the direct spend of what's going in to the event itself, but the indirect spends to more of that supplemental activities surrounding in the community. And with that, based on uh, being here, what are some things that the event can actually drive to generate more spending? And that's what they call the equation of the multiplier. So when you're planning an event, this is actually pretty common when submitting event proposals or working with a nonprofit or working with an institution to show the validity of what the true scope of this is. This is a common equation that comes into play. Regarding your individual projects, this is something that would take some creative planning to do. I'm not expecting you to have a, purely accurate um, economic impact statement with it, but I want you to showcase these elements of what it would mean for hotels in terms of visitors, what it would mean in terms of restaurants, in terms of traffic around your event hours, and all that kind of stuff. So, on from there. Then, because many organizations view these impact statements to be important, it's easy to be off the mark, and it's often impossible to understand what that true economic impact is. So with this, when you do plan events, we do have to be accurate in terms of the budgeting. We got to make sure internally, what that impact is on the venue. Once you think about all the swag or the t-shirt giveaways or the medals, whatever it is that would be, could be added to an event expense report. But also you got to be thinking about who you're working with in the community, what you need to do to gather their information to understand what those hotel numbers are on a normal weekend, and then you can really calculate a little more effectively year 2, year 3, and beyond once you know the base, and then can start to grow that from there. So it's hard to track all these dynamics. Just something to really consider about when you're building events and creating marketing plans and marketing strategies in different lines of work. We got to have an understanding of what basis is involved to begin with, to have a better understanding of what the true value of the event is, after it actually leaves town. So then, like I said, sports commissions. So this sports commissions are groups that are imperative to the development, success, and volume of events coming to different cities. So this is where you think about Little League, or not Little League, but I guess, yeah, Little League size baseball tournaments or 5Ks. Thinking about cycling competitions or swim meets for a community. So with this, there's small groups. Everyone's pretty specialized, but they're groups that could be integrated within a nonprofit institution, like a visitor, or they could be their own nonprofit. They could be integrated within a visitors bureau. But when it comes to careers in the sport management realm, these are pretty awesome areas that I've seen students intern at in the past. So like the Lansing Sports Authority, they have part-time interns year round doing relevant work. The Detroit Sports Commission, a little larger scale, um, really crossing the venues in terms of sports and festivals, in terms of the age, the size of the groups that are being involved. So just something to alert yourselves to. It is a cool career path that you could get your foot in the door with, but it's more seen at those levels of larger cities, larger scale, regional engagement group stuff like that. So then with the bidding process comes what you're doing for your individual project, and that's a request for a proposal. So this is what you're laying out to share the expectations of the event. So then I drafted this so you could see how it kind of aligns, how RFP aligns with what you're going to be doing as in the project. But really, first for a RFP, who's the host? What events has this host been associated with in the past? What's their foundation in terms of community support? So if you're looking to work with an organization such as a high school to put on a 5K, have they done stuff like that before? If you're working with a nonprofit such as the YMCA, what they do have a good volunteer base, that's something to consider. And what kind of support would they have to put something on? Kind of parallel with the host organization in some instances is a venue. Does the location check the box? Is the layout appropriate? Is there enough parking? What's the proximity to other amenities in the area? So with that, is it close to restaurants? Is it close to hotels? Do the hotels have the capacity? What are the rates going to be that weekend? All that stuff, events have, that's something that goes to be factored in when putting these events together. When thinking about oh shoot, I forgot to hit the recording button. Well, you're gonna be luckier than your other students in this class. All right, now we're recording for everyone else. But that you get the publicity, the marketing. So this is what you're doing the next stage of the project. So okay, you have this idea, you've identified a location, you've identified a host organization, you've identified the overall construct of the event. What marketing is going to come into play? How are you going to broadcast that message? What's that budget going to be that's going to allow you to put this on or not put it on? Then also pairing it together, with that event schedule compared to just saying, hey, I'm doing this big festival over at Michigan International Speedway. Well, what's happening and what are the logistics behind this? When's equipment getting in the venue? When do contracts have to be signed? When do vendors need to be secured? When do volunteers have to arrive? And thinking about it from the micro detail, just to show that this is a well orchestrated plan, compared to having a loose identity. Whoops. And then building on from that is the overall feasibility study. So this is where we kind of talk about the SWOT analysis from last week, but for your group project is a feasibility study in its core. So the things to consider, it's like, what are we working with here, right? Is this something that students use? Is this something that members of the Grand Rapids community are, do they frequent this? Who overall is engaging with the space as is, and who do we want to work with to grow it to the next level? So thinking about this as well, what's the impact on staffing, on finances? Is there enough support to do this from the institution that's hosting this, or are you going to need to build a committee or have other people lead the event? So when it comes to the feasibility study, this is where you're really articulating as an event manager the inner workings and figuring out if this is realistic or possible. And a big thing, having these questions on the forefront, that your facility, your venue, your host, your city will be able to put it on or not. From there, as you package this stuff together, this is what many organizations do to submit what we call bid documents. Inside, and this just goes back to your project, this is actually pretty repetitive, when you're talking about how how RFPs and are fed into the feasibility study, or the feasibility studies fed into the RFPs. And then these bid documents are where you're really putting it together in straight form to submit. So while your RFP is the overall flow and construct of that project, the bid documents are the inner workings of really what you're thinking about, just to show that there's enough organization. You're working with local emergency responders. You're identifying the other competitive venues in the region, that you have enough space. So it's basically the materials within the proposal showing that you've put everything together. Now, with that, a lot of this is, could be common sense in terms of how it runs in tandem with each other, but others is, the meticulousness that's really needed in terms of the full execution to put something on. So if you're hosting a 5K, all right, well, we gotta make sure that the fire department is one of the first ones to know, to make sure these lanes can actually be shut down for access to different venues. We got to think about what the engineering department for the city or the venue might have to do to make renditions to the facility or the event space. We got to be thinking about the budget in terms of volunteers, or even compensating volunteer organizations that are providing volunteers. So a lot of stacked levels to this whole thing. But wanted to see, I'll give you 15 seconds to get some text in there, or to ask to unmute yourselves. Wondering if you have any questions about the first or for chapter 3. All right, see that Tyler is talking. Very good, Tyler. Tyler's actually the one student in this class that was in my last one. I'm sure Tyler is flabbergasted that there's more than one student in this group meeting, because Tyler's the one student that participated every week. It was actually one of the most amazing things I've ever observed as an educator in my life. So, all right. Thank you, Tyler. Great contributions. All right, moving forward, halfway done. Pretty exciting. Chapter 4. So this is ultimately the most important part of the event management process. We got to understand where money is coming in. We got to understand where money is going out. So whether you are a large event venue such as the DTE Energy Music Center up in Commerce Township area, or you're a very, 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 very small nonprofit looking to host a fundraiser, or anything in between and beyond, the budget has to be thought about every stage of this. So, kicks off with the preliminary budget, and the terms of your individual project and your group project, we'll be working more with that final budget. So as we continue to think through things, as we continue to determine what money has to be spent on printing expenditures, on staffing, on technology, on whatever rentals, this is something that in the form of the project will be more that final stage that you'll be submitting. So when you think about the budgeting process, one big thing is we have to make sure that it aligns with the organization's goals. So what are you trying to accomplish with this? And does it make sense to bring or to put the money out for what it's going to bring in at the end of the day? So when thinking about the scale of putting events on, what's a realistic scope? So like for a sports commission might have to partner with an org like the Lansing Sports Commission probably has to partner with the Lansing Lugnuts, maybe a couple other nonprofits or charities, maybe a couple high schools, maybe a local university to put something on the scale that they want. If they don't have the historical background of putting an event on, this is where outsourcing of resources will come into play, to manage the overall experience. So then with this too, like for that Lansing Sports Commission example, what are what factors are in play locally? Like, are there vendors that can help put this together? Are there sponsors that are going to compensate it? Is there competition come into play? So if going back to the example with your project, if you are picking an event during a Sunday in the fall, is this something that you're going to have a hard time with due to the NFL taking place or on a college football Saturday? So think about those factors when it comes to the research and how that could influence the overall revenues that are going to come in with the event. And then for projecting on profits or losses, we really, 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 as event managers, have to lay out very early where's the money coming from. I mean, this is like one of the first stages of the event, far beyond ticket sales. If it's a ticketed event, is this something that you could generate revenues through sponsorships, through advertising fees? Are you going to have food and beverage on site? Are tickets going to be the main source? So thinking about, I'm going to use Gus Macker a lot throughout this course. One second, my 4-year-old's asking for candy. I have no idea where your candy is. I can find it in 20 minutes. Sound good? All right. Yep, exactly. Thank you. So for Gus Macker, when it comes to the model, this is different event to event. So in Jackson, the core money maker are sponsorships from business partners. Then player registrations make up a solid mix that ultimately covers the cost of trophies, of t-shirts, of medals, and of referees. However, in Ludington has basically zero sponsors and they rely on player registration to pay the bills. Completely different budgeting dynamics for an identical event in terms of what we're looking to accomplish. So when it comes, business to business, community to community, university to university, everyone has a different structure of how they value and how they identify those revenue sources. For expenses, when you look at where the money's going, there's a lot of things that you can overlook in the incidentals. Yeah, are you going to have to print stuff on paper, at the front of the door? Are you going to have to utilize technology that you don't have to get some sort of ticket portal up there? So think about, all the odds and ends where money could be going at the end of the day. So to break that down more specifically, we're going to take a look at a few different revenues or opportunities for revenue in different events. What I would consider the most obvious for many event goers is tickets and registration. So when you go to a high school volleyball game and want to, just go in as a community member, you're paying a ticket fee. When you go to a Red Wings game, or this could be different levels, but you could be buying a ticket, but you also could have a membership that covers the multiple costs of games. This is often, that stabilized headcount that or what to expect. This is the volume that you can max out with for a certain event. So, of course, forums such as SeatGeek or Ticketmaster have kind of changed the dynamic of the true value of a seat. But going into different events, there's a fixed number of tickets, registrations, and memberships that many event organizers have to work with. And that's when it comes to figuring out the inventory. How many people are going to buy the general admission tickets to something versus the VIP tickets versus the lower bowl compared to upper corner tickets. So all those values, all those variables come naturally from research, and then over time for fixed seating venues, you're going to have more of a clue of what you have to work with here. And then if you're planning a first time event or a second, third year event, if you're working to grow it, how can you safely grow this event? Are you comfortable having 10,000 people here the first time? Or is that really going to overwhelm you as an event manager? Maybe it's safe to start off with a ticketed capacity of 4,000, and the goal 3 years from now is that 10,000 mark. That's a very dangerous path that there's quite a few stories and articles on out there of promoters, event managers biting off far more than they can chew. Another form of revenue, which will be essential. So, like for tickets registration, some of you are going to have that for, or like registering for like a 5K or for like a Gus Macker tournament. That's that same parallel with ticket sales. So some of you might have the tickets registration membership route, some of you won't. Sponsorships is something that all of you will likely have at some capacity. So sponsorships are when you're partnering with specific organizations, corporations, businesses to have that guaranteed revenue covered for certain items. So you look at the background of the biker, sponsorships range from the Garmin that supported him, that got him his revenues, his training, his resources, to organizations such as Yodel and IG Markets, who are overall sponsors for an event. So sponsors can layer from a participant, from sponsoring a team, to sponsoring the overall event, to sponsoring intricacies of the event. Maybe everyone who walks in, the first 8,000 fans in the door of the Little Caesars Arena, they're going to get a towel to swing around. Or maybe the first 12,000 at Comerica, they're going to get a bobblehead of Candelario. That's where that sponsorship identity really pairs in, and it's something that you see to be very, 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 very specific, while general marketing is a little broader than that definition. And the other example here on the right, well, you see the Art Beer and Wine Festival. They are presented by County National Bank. So, in part of County National sponsorship, they have to be everywhere you see the logo. If you don't see their name with the logo, that's a violation of the sponsorship agreement. For the Chevy race at Comerica Park, that's something the Chevy brand within General Motors provides substantial money to offset the cost for a high visibility, consistent branding experience that they're going to benefit from 81 games of a regular season. Then comes the revenue area of merchandising and licensing. So what type of items could be available for sale? So what you think about many sporting events, there's a sales tent. Could be a branded water bottle. It could be something a guest takes away. Going back to that, like the towel or a bobblehead, something like that. Merchandising, kind of crosses that realm at times, but it's also the standalone opportunity for sales. So more of like a retail type element in simple terms. Going from there, and similar to that, we have food and beverage sales. So think about the impact. So when you think about the impact of what concessions have on major sports events, go all the way from a $6 hot dog to a $12 beer. Nowadays, you've seen a lot of creative interpretations to that food and beverage realm. I was at a high school basketball game actually last year prior to the shutdown over in Kalamazoo. And yep, they had concession food, but they also had food trucks sitting outside. No one was supporting the concessions because they wanted the brisket, they wanted the tacos, they were going outside to get the good stuff. But the school was smart enough that those food trucks had to pay money to be there. So that way, the school was benefiting through that vendor relation where they were taking in money while they were also supporting another business that could generate their own revenue stream from that. So think, creatively when it comes to that, especially in your individual projects. Another thing to consider and to really look out for when you go to different events is how has technology changed the game. So in the bottom right corner, there's an example of the way the Reds do it, where you don't even walk up to a concession front anymore. You're typing your order either on this mobile thing, or you could be texting your order in, or not texting, using the application on your phone. And compared to waiting in line, missing an inning of play, you put in your order. Once it's ready, you get dinged, you walk up, grab your food out of a heating tray, and you're on. So it's going to be very interesting to see. And I mean, this was happening prior to COVID. It'll be fascinating to watch the evolution of this low contact, low interaction stuff that could actually really enhance the experience of the fan when you can spend more time in the seats, less time in the lines. Other types of revenue are parking. So uh like when you think about going to different fairgrounds, does it cost money to park for that event? Or you go to an open concept of a city, do they have, is the city um, civil engineering department benefiting from these uh, hour to hour parking registrations? Do you have to pay to get into a parking garage? Easy revenue generator. And when you think about like downtown Detroit, for example, when you have four major sporting teams playing within a quarter mile of each other, that's where those parking infrastructures have the power to have uh, these rates kind of boomeranging over the times, where I could go to town and see a Tigers game at 1 o'clock, sneak in for maybe $15 if I get there before 10 a.m. But maybe that night the Wings are playing across the street or the Lions are playing come noon. Those ticket rates or those parking rates could go upwards of $100. So easy money because you have to park somewhere. Kind of cheating the fans a little bit, but hey, that's sport management. That's the business that we're all talking about. Publications, very straightforward example of a publication that you could generate money from with a special event is having a program. I always think baseball is like, what do you do when you walk in? Like as a kid, my grandpa always got me a program. That way, I was, looking at the stats of the players, looking at the pretty pictures. Didn't realize, grandpa's paying $10 to get that stupid piece of literature that I threw away probably by the fifth inning. So easy revenue generation. Or when you think about high school sport events or college events, that program, you're going to see more logos in there, more ads, more stuff about stuff not related to the game, because they pay the bills to produce that publication. And now the publication's just added money on top of it. Easy revenue generation. And then corporate hospitality. So thinking about what you can do to upscale the revenues on things that are existing. Could there be a VIP room? Could there be a hospitality tent? What are some other things that you could do to get revenue with a financially wealthy group organization? Then when we talk about um, like donations, grants, and subsidies, this is a route some of you might go for your individual project. Grants are kind of an unknown time to time. You could submit for a grant and get rejected. Next year, you could submit, get approved. So this is something that likely stems to more higher level needs that the community is working with with the state, federal government, or even the city government. Grants are a little risky to bank on, and so are donors. So donors are different than sponsors, where a sponsor is basically a given. You know, you're going to have sponsors at these different levels, especially come year two of the event. You know what's happening. A donor is more of an isolated strategic ask that you could get. So on the right, Al Glick is not the sponsor of the Glick Fieldhouse practice facility at the University of Michigan. He was a donor that gave a fat check, and then in return his name got on the building. So it's a very different approach, you know, working with the business for this for this advertisement buy versus a single person looking to shell out some cash to do something they believe in. Sports commissions, already talked about them. Government subsidies, so it is common that governments might waive fees to bring an event to town. So this is where, you know, it costs money to hire police, hire security for an event. Sometimes cities will say, hey, we got the police covered, we're not going to bill you for their hours involved with this. So there are things like that, you know, much larger levels that governments do to play in. Then also media rights, thinking about the money that comes in with contracts for broadcasting, whether it's TV, internet radio, could be a single game contract, called a time buy, could do trades with local media for advertising, for advertising barter, like, hey, we'll recognize you as our media sponsor, so we'll give additional uh, recognition while you give us some airtime. Common for small communities compared to larger communities for that. Then also pay-per-view. You think about UFC, occasional horse racing, you know, specialized events that aren't on contracted broadcast networks. Pay-per-view events are easy, quick revenue generators in some sports. Then we go to expenses. So expenses can be everywhere from, you know, the basic operating costs from having a staff. You got to make sure that you have the appropriate medical or regulation support on site. Got to have the equipment, services. This this is an area that it's easy to mess up if you're not prepared to have, you know, if you're opening an event up to large numbers for the very first time, it is very hard to identify all your expenses. As you know, if you're hosting a small town community event, you could be the person running around buying stuff out of your own pocket and hoping you're going to get reimbursed at the end of the day to put it on. In more regulated operations, you know, these are things that are easy to calculate based on success of other events, of other festivals. So it's a area of experimentation for many. So some types of expenses, facility or venue costs. So when you think about an organization being an arena, do they have to pay their, you know, do they have to pay a fee to be there? In the Pistons case, yes, they are a tenant of Little Caesars Arena. While at Comerica Park, it is a Detroit Tigers field. So a little different relationship there. Thinking about if you wanted to host an event at a convention center, it's going to cost money. However, if you're Jackson College and you want to host a small basketball game or a small basketball tournament, you already own the facility. Now it's the smaller, so you can save a lot of money by hosting something on site, but then it's these other areas that are going to come into play. Insurance, common thing that's often overlooked. In your individual project, I'm really excited to see what types of insurance you might be interested in. Because if it's something that you're looking to host a music concert or a music festival, that's a whole new realm from a youth sports tournament in terms of liability protection if alcohol's involved. So, regardless of it's a youth golf tournament or a country music festival, there are volumes of liability that differentiate for what you're trying to accomplish to protect you as an event manager as well as the organization. Also, you could have prize money, transportations for player related costs or special guest costs. If you want to have an influencer come in, what's that cost to get that influencer to do a post on Instagram to promote your event? Those are very, 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 very common investment or expense streams nowadays for events of all sizes. Capital investment. Are you going to have to invest a lot in the infrastructure? So when companies are bidding on, uh, the X Games or when they're bidding on the NCAA Final Four, they have to put the money to redo some areas to make sure this happens. That's talking in the hundreds of millions, if not billions, dollars of scope. But thinking about a smaller event, if you want to put a band over here in the park, is there power there? So that's something event organizers would have to work with different parties on to make sure those capital investments are in play to put it on. Marketing and promotion, thinking about if you're going to have an on-site photographer, what's the cost of social media, what's the cost for different giveaways and promo items, all pretty common stuff in that realm. For sponsor fulfillment, so okay, so we saw the Art Beer and Wine Festival, they had that pretty little logo at the bottom for County National Bank. So what do they get with it? Are they happy that, with their investment, that they're getting their name on the logo and that's it? Probably not. So for something like that, maybe the sponsor is going to get tickets. Okay, the sponsor gets tickets. Now you have to adjust your overall numbers because you're selling less tickets for what was given away. But also, those tickets might be worth something. Is it in exchange for alcohol? So now that's revenues that you're losing when you toss out something, in that scale to the community. So thinking thinking of other stuff, maybe you have for sponsors, they get free food, uh they get a room of air conditioning, they get a heater under their tent, whatever the scenario is. That's stuff that, no one's going to sponsor the heater, but that's something that you have to budget for when planning a potential hospitality area or something like that for an event. For guest management, make sure there's accessibility resources around for presentation. Are you just going to have a table for someone to claim trophies if you're hosting a youth sports tournament? Maybe not. That's a cost regardless. Are people going to be collecting trash? Are you going to have catering? Are you going to have to buy food in different ways that vendors aren't covering? All things that bring that event together have to be calculated. And of course, my favorite category planning events, because it's the one that I dip into the most since I budget pretty horribly different times, is that miscellaneous contingency column. So if you know what money you're going to make and what money you're going to spend, there's always layers that are going to pop up. So always having that added contingency category is essential, regardless the scale of the event. Then the final slide of the day. I can't believe I talked this long. I really apologize for that. I truly thought you'd be out of here 20 minutes ago. So for controlling costs, just make sure that there is accountability beginning to end on where the money is going. Document it as you go along. So smaller events, it's a little easier to do. For larger events, it's a little more challenging. Like who all has access for the accounts and for the spend. So larger organizations, people are going to be responsible for specific items. But if you're that mid-size organization and someone over here is making an organization or making a decision and you're making another one, got to just make sure we understand who has control and who will be making those decisions at the end of the day. I've seen locally at some events that have happened around Jackson. I know event managers were quite surprised when other people authorized certain payments while they previously weren't approved. So, more of an issue with like small to mid level events. There's more of a process at that larger professional, you know, festival scale. And lastly, something to really consider in event management is cash flow and management. So for first time events, you can't just have a goal. If this is an annual thing, you can't just have a goal to cover the costs. You're probably, you having to pay bills prior to the event. So money's going to be coming out when there's no money. There's no sales. You don't have your tickets yet. You don't have all your sponsors yet. So sometimes, especially for small to mid-sized venues, it's important to work with fiduciaries or other financial organizations that could help balance the money up front. Very, 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 very common in the small to mid-sized event space. And less of a problem for those larger organizations unless it's a mega event that we're talking about come into play. But with that, what I was going at, if it's a first year event, you don't have the money, but also you gotta save money to make sure you have those costs covered come next year. So if there's fees, if there's upfront expenses that you have this year, you should probably have that money kept in uh at the end of the day, because you're going to be spending at least $5,000 on this. Let's make sure we keep 7,000 of those profits and direct it to that 2022 account just to make sure our bills are paid up front. So, with that, that's all I have for module 2, part 1 on chapters 3 and 4. Wondering if anyone had questions on the content covered today or